The Carson Wentz thing. How would you describe the situation they're in now, losing Wentz for whatever 5 to 12 weeks, plus losing the offensive guard Quentin Nelson, who people may not realize it, but might be as good as literally any player in the NFL?
Yeah, Greeny, it's not a great time right now to be an Indianapolis Colts fan. There's a lot that seems to be falling apart at the seams day one, day two here. Darius Leonard also had an ankle injury. He's another one of our superstars who's about to get absolutely broken off in a payday after Fred Warner's deal in San Francisco because all of his stats are better than Fred's, and they're both about the same age at this point. So Darius Leonard was down going into camp. Then all of a sudden Carson Wentz has this high school foot injury, poke its little stupid bonehead into the fray after throwing a 70-yard bomb in the middle of training camp and looking like he's all the way back. He has to have surgery. Then the next day, a developmental anomaly is how Frank Reich described it to me about Quentin Nelson. His foot had an extra bone growing in it his entire life. Something happened. It chipped off. It won a fray. So they have to surgically remove that as well. All hell is breaking loose. But Frank Reich said to me yesterday on my show, he said, everything's going to be cool. He said normally the 5 to 12 week window is in there because they don't know how the surgery is going to take. They don't know how the rehab's going to take. All word out of the Carson Wentz surgery is that everything went swimmingly. Now, hopefully the same thing will happen for Quentin. I don't love that we're not getting the camaraderie moments in training camp, especially with Carson being sidelined for 2 weeks now immediately after this. So I don't think he's getting to know his teammates as well, the timing with the receivers and everything like that I think is very vital. But when you're talking about Carson, if he's going to get back to 2017 Carson Wentz, Quentin Nelson, who's going to go down, is maybe the greatest guard to ever play football, and Darius Leonard, who's trying to do the same damn thing. I think we're going to be okay when the season starts here in about 36 days. But right now it looks terrible in Indianapolis. I think Frank and the team are expecting Carson to be back early in the season. Jacob Eason will be able to take the reps. Who knows how he's going to do? We also got Sam Ehlinger, and they just brought in Brett Hundley, who I know doesn't have the greatest tape on earth whenever he gets into games, but I think we have a lot of trust in Frank over here. And if that injury was a little bit longer, or expectations were for it to be nearer 12 weeks as opposed to 5, I think the Nick Foles stories would hold a little bit of weight, but right now I just don't think that's the case.
Fair enough. There's Pat McAfee with me from the Pat McAfee Show on the Goodyear Hotline, helping you discover the road ahead. Goodyear, more driven. 2 other things I want to ask you about while I have a minute with you here. One of them is something that I think you'd feel very comfortable in with your foray now into wrestling, where you have become something of a superstar in that milieu. Did you see the battle royale that broke out at the Giants camp yesterday? It was interesting to me because the coach, Joe Judge, lost his mind. There was a big brawl. The quarterback wound up at the bottom of a pile, so obviously no one wants to see that. But I'm old enough to remember a time, Pat, when the coaches loved it when the players would fight at practice. There was something about that I think there were coaches who tried to instigate that kind of thing. Generally speaking, when you see a big fight in practice these days, do you think to yourself that's a good sign or a bad sign for the team?
See, I've only been out of the NFL, I think, 4 years now at this point, and I think towards the end of my career versus the beginning of my career, I played 8 years. It was a lot different culture. It was a lot different world. And I'm not talking about the things that were being said to people. I think I've always been in a very respectful locker room. But I'm just talking about the invitations to nutritionists to be added into every single building, where instead of having beer and pizza and wings the night before a game like I did with some of my teammates in that first regime, the winningest decade in the history of the NFL at the point. Then a year later, a nutritionist comes and we're drinking these kale smoothies the night before the game, and it's absolutely miserable, but it's better. A lot has changed over the short period of time here in the NFL, and probably for the better if I had to guess. And I've always been somebody that whenever I saw a fight happen, I was always intrigued by who did it, how it came to be, and also what happens immediately afterwards, which is normally, just like in real life back in the day, when you fight somebody, it normally brings you closer to them. You settle your disagreement, you move along, but we're in a much different time now. MCDC actually just talked about 2 guys that fought up in the Detroit Lions camp, MCDC Motor City, Dan Campbell. He just talked about how he likes seeing the intensity and the energy, and there's an old saying that training camp hasn't really even started until there was a fight. But now it's a much different time. I think a lot of coaches don't want the wasted risk or energy from the players. I think science has shown that throwing a fist at a helmet is not necessarily the best thing, especially when your franchise quarterback's at the bottom. So I think it's just a much different time than it was just a few years ago. And I think it's all because we know a lot more now than we did in the past. And that's just not necessarily something that's great. I think the biggest takeaway from the Joe Judge situation yesterday, Greeny, for me is, and Greeny, I think you've been around me a little bit, and you're the only reason I really got on ESPN. So I appreciate you immensely. I think you know that I'm a pretty observant human being. I think that is something that I think that people could say I am. And when I was in the NFL, I was very lucky. I got to observe a lot and watch a lot and be in a lot of rooms. The biggest and most important thing I think that happened if you're a Giants fan yesterday and that whole thing is not one player on that team told Joe Judge no whenever he said, we're going to run laps, we're going to run 100-yard sprints, then we're going to do push-ups afterwards. All you need is one vet, one person that's notable in that locker room to look at Joe Judge and tell him to go fornicate himself, and not one person did that. So I think that means that team is very tight. The fighting is something that's potentially going to happen in a violent sport, especially in training camp when it's 100 degrees and people are running into each other. I think I learned a lot more about how close that team was yesterday as opposed to how far apart they are.
That's what I expected you to say, and outstanding. Pat McAfee, one more thing quick. What's going to happen with your boy Aaron Rodgers? How is that going to go in Green Bay?
Well, I'm not 100% sure. It's great to see him back. The golf cart's fantastic. Bakhtiari said that I was a part of the bullying process of him being forced to get that Aston Martin golf cart for Aaron Rodgers via the shows last year. He looks happy. I assume Matt LaFleur is overjoyed that he is back. I think we just got to see how the year goes. I mean, if there's a chance for him to leave at the end of this year, there's definitely a chance for him to stay at the end of this year as well. I'm pumped for it. I'm going to follow along, but I'm very happy that the greatest passer of the ball in the history of the game is back playing for a team he has a lot of commonality with, especially with old Randall Cobb coming back there.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.